When I walked into Lisa's apartment for the first time as husband rather than guest, I carried with me the promise of stability, a man who would keep the lights on and the rent paid, who would never step on her daughter Maya's memories of the man she lost. I understood from the start that Maya's devotion to her father's shadow would always come first, and I did not try to carve out a place in her heart by forcing comparisons or contrived affection. I simply resolved to be there in the mornings when she woke, to make sure her breakfast was ready and her school uniform pressed, to help with algebra or listen to her rage when assignments overwhelmed her 15-year-old aspirations. For 4 years, I arranged every bill under my name: electricity, internet, Lisa's tuition courses, Maya's private school tuition, so that neither woman in my life ever worried about another overdue notice or late fee. Yet respect, it seemed, was never on anyone's ledger, and I learned quickly that spreadsheets and auto payments do not translate into affection. Maya's sharp tongue was ever ready with a retort for any rule I tried to set: a curfew that felt reasonable, hall passes during study hall, the requirement to call home if she stayed out past 9. Each evening, I braced for another eye roll, another sneer, as though every act of parental care was an intrusion into a world built by her father, and she alone would decide who belonged in it. Teenage moods, Lisa called it, waving off my concerns as though I were an overprotective fool instead of a man trying to build a family. I swallowed disappointment day after day until that night. An ordinary Friday when I pulled into a dimly lit driveway to collect Maya from a party where I'd been assured just a few friends would be hanging out. She climbed into the car with the scent of cheap beer on her breath, her steps unsteady and her words slurred into an accusation I would never forget. "I'll never love you. My dad was better than you'll ever be." The words slammed into me like a hammer to the chest, but they were not the dagger I still felt twisting inside my ribs. The true blade came later, when that same daughter's mother, the woman I vowed to love and protect, chose indifference over defense. I found myself bleeding silence into our bed that night, lying shoulder to shoulder with Lisa as though nothing had happened, my back turned in an act of quiet revolt rather than gushy confrontation. With my eyes fixed on the unbroken dark, I realized that loyalty earned through bank statements and midnight runs for cough syrup was nothing compared to the betrayal of being dismissed with a flick of a finger and a half-asleep comment. "Isn't that the truth?" When I told Lisa the exact words Maya had uttered, convinced she would demand an apology on my behalf, she only muttered without looking up, "Why are you surprised? Isn't that the truth?" and continued scrolling through her phone. That was the moment a switch flipped inside me, not a roar or a demand, but a decision crystallized into the cold clarity of dawn. I resolved that if respect could not be bought with every dollar I had, then I would invest those resources elsewhere. The next morning, the house felt different beneath my feet as I moved from room to room like a ghost who had already vacated his body. I canceled Lisa's phone plan without fanfare, severed Maya's credit card privileges, stopped every tuition payment, even altered the Netflix password so that the glow of the television screen would no longer be my responsibility. I noticed then how my absence was invisible. No photograph of us together on the refrigerator, only a dusty portrait of Maya with her father and Lisa from some happier day. No thank you note left on the kitchen counter. Just the hum of an electric stove and the faint echo of my own heartbeat. When Lisa appeared in her robe and asked why I was up so early, I nodded curtly and said, "Got some things to take care of," watching her confusion bloom into frustration as I walked past her without a backward glance. At work that afternoon, I sat behind the mahogany desk I had earned through promotions and late nights, dialed my attorney Jared Sloan, and asked for a clean break. No spousal support, no protracted fight over household goods, no grudges carried into court. After hanging up, I booked a tiny roadside hotel room far enough away that betrayal would not find me at midnight, but close enough that I could grab my bag and leave the next morning without missing the coffee. I texted Lisa, "Don't wait up. We'll talk tomorrow." No response. That evening, I watched headlights blur past the rain-slicked window and let the weight of 4 years begin to slip off my shoulders, one layer of resentment at a time. I had never imagined that helping with algebra homework, consoling bruised egos after breakups, and covering every expense could amount to nothing more than a utility bill, easily disconnected. But I had grown tired of living in a house where every act of kindness was met with disdain and every sacrifice was taken for granted. So I chose clarity over chaos, silence over arguments, and walked away from the only family I had ever known to prove that self-respect, unlike tuition checks, cannot be auto-funded. I remember the moment I decided to speak out, standing at the threshold of our bedroom doorway, the stale warmth of the night still clinging to the sheets where Lisa lay half asleep, scrolling through her phone. My voice came out steadier than I felt, as if I were reciting dialogue rather than confessing the words my stepdaughter had hurled at me. Maya said she'll never love me, I told her, watching the glow of her screen reflect in her eyes. She said her dad was better than I'll ever be. I expected her to sit up, to shake her head, to shout, not from my mouth, but instead she murmured without looking up, "Why are you surprised? Isn't that the truth?" And tapped the screen as though dismissing my grievance like a notification I could ignore. In that instant, I realized I was an unpaid actor in the life of two women who refused to see me as more than a convenience. I felt my hands clench at my sides, the memory of every unpaid bill I'd carried, all the tuition checks, the grocery runs, the rent payments, mixing with the sting of betrayal. I did not shout. I did not plead. I simply closed the door behind me, and my heart folded into itself as though I were sealing off the part of me that still believed this marriage was a sanctuary. That night, I lay beside Lisa in silence, my back to her, facing the darkness that seemed more honest than any conversation could be. I counted the ceiling's imperfections, the faint crack where paint peeled, the swirl of a long-dried water stain, and in that hush, I recognized the emptiness I had invited into my own life. I did not feel sorrow so much as I felt resolve crystallizing into something powerful and unbreakable. The air between us was heavy with words unsaid, apology, regret, excuse. But I refused to supply them. I refused to ask for forgiveness. Instead, I tasted freedom for the first time in years, realizing that anger can be a beacon as bright as love, and that sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is silent withdrawal. As I drifted toward sleep, I imagined the bills I had written as invisible chains, every dollar a link binding me to a household that offered nothing but scorn in return. I pictured those links snapping one by one, the metal snapping back into nothingness until I was unshackled. My chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of decision. I would not waste another heartbeat earning loyalty that wasn't mine to command. When the first pale light of dawn crept across the floorboards, I rose without ceremony, moving through the house with deliberate care. The emptiness of each room felt like a confession. No photographs of our wedding day, no drawings Maya had taped to the fridge, no tokens of appreciation on the kitchen counter. Only my silence filled the spaces where acknowledgement should have been. I took a deep breath and walked to the study, where the laptop hummed in sleep mode atop the desk I had moved in order to support Lisa's online classes. With trembling fingers, I logged in and changed every password, email, bank accounts, streaming services, so that the evidence of my contributions would still exist but no longer bear my name. This was not punishment, it was clarity. I paused by the framed photo on the mantel, the one from our honeymoon. Lisa's radiant smile, Maya at her side holding her father's hand. I remembered that day as one of hope, of believing I could be the man they needed. Now, I placed the frame face down on the shelf, hiding it from sight, but not discarding it entirely, because memory need not be destruction. I simply refused to worship ghosts any longer. Later, I packed a bag in the closet, folding enough clothes for a week and slipping in my favorite book, the one Lisa jokingly called my escape plan, though I had never used it as such until now. I zipped it shut with calm determination, as though each click of the zipper were a heartbeat marking my newfound resolve. I left a note on her pillow, "Don't wait up. We'll talk when we're both ready," and tucked it beneath the edge of her pillow. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer, studying the curve of her body in repose and the soft rise of her breath, the rhythm of a woman oblivious to how deeply she had wounded the man next to her. At the kitchen table, I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam curling like a question. Was I making a mistake? The answer emerged with the bitterness on my tongue. I had tried, for 4 years, to replace the role left vacant by a man Maya would never stop loving, and I had failed not because I lacked effort, but because I lacked permission. No matter how many bills I covered, no matter how many lectures on responsibility I delivered, I remained an outsider to their grief. The truth stung as much as Lisa's muttered confession. I was never meant to belong. I called my attorney, Jared, and spoke in calm, measured tones. I want a clean break. No alimony, no custody issues. I'm not looking for drama, just closure. His voice was a steady anchor, offering paperwork and timelines without judgment. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the last tendrils of doubt dissolve as though they had never existed. By midday, I was out the front door, the soft click behind me echoing like the closing of a chapter. I carried my bag over my shoulder and glanced back only once, absorbing the sight of the house I had tried to build a family in. I did not wave, did not call out. I simply turned and walked away, each step lightening the burden in my chest. The sunlight felt warm on my face, and with each breath, I tasted the promise of a life unmoored from resentment. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, or whether Lisa would call, or if Maya would realize too late the man she had lost. But as I strode down the sidewalk, the tight line between self-sacrifice and self-respect blurred into clarity. I was done proving my worth to ghosts and skeptics. I was stepping into a future defined not by others' approval, but by my own conviction. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. I moved through our home the next morning as if I were already a stranger, tracing familiar paths with a detached calm that surprised even me. The sunlight slanted through the blinds in golden stripes across the hardwood floors, and I felt neither nostalgia nor regret, only a curious sense of clarity. I began in the kitchen, where the coffee maker sat, half brewing the night before's grounds, and reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen as I opened the mobile app for our phone service provider. Without hesitation, I tapped Manage Lines, selected Lisa's number, and pressed Cancel Service. A confirmation beep sounded, and I exhaled slowly, the weight of 4 years' worth of cellular bills lifting like a hidden burden. Next, I called Maya's credit card company. Her name still appeared on my joint account, even though she'd attained an independence she had refused to acknowledge. The representative asked for my verification details, and I gave them, my voice steady. Yes, I'd like to close this card effective immediately. The polite, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" seemed to echo in my chest long after I hung up. Walking through the living room, I noticed the framed photographs perched on the mantel. Images of birthdays and graduations and vacations meant to bind us together. I picked up each frame and turned it face down, careful not to shatter the glass. There, on the wall above the TV, hung a collage of Maya's artwork, a watercolor of a sunset, a graphite sketch of her favorite oak tree, a scribbled hope chest labeled Future. I did not rip them from the wall. Rather, I allowed them to remain, silent testaments to a love I had offered but never claimed. I did not need to destroy their memories to reclaim my own. In the study, I found the folder containing receipts and account statements, years of grocery staples, online course fees, and quarterly tuition payments. Each sheet bore my signature, a testament to unreciprocated devotion. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and placed them in an envelope addressed to Lisa, records of my contributions. At the bottom of the stack went a single page of my own choosing, typed in Courier New. "These transactions are closed. Thank you for understanding." I left the envelope on her pillow so she would discover it later, after I had disappeared from her routines. I opened the door to my closet and surveyed the shelves of tightly folded clothes. I had once labeled shirts office, casual, and weekend, so that every aspect of my life was organized for efficiency. Today, I filled a suitcase with a week's worth of attire. Neutral slacks, crisp white shirts, the gray sweater I had worn on our first anniversary. I knew I would not return wearing any of it. In the depths of the closet lay the laptop I had used to stream our favorite shows and video call Maya when she was sick. I unplugged it and placed it into a separate box for donation. I paused for a moment, hand on the zipper, and felt a pang of something resembling loss, but it was quickly replaced by the cool comfort of certainty. I crossed the hall to the children's bathroom where, despite Maya's occasional username graffiti, I had filled the cabinet with her shampoo and face wash, and the night I stayed up to soothe her fever. I removed every bottle with mechanical precision, lined them up on the counter, and wiped the shelf clean. The bathroom would now be hers alone, untainted by my presence. In the spare bedroom, the study I had converted into a guest room when relatives visited. I took down the welcome mat and removed the spare linens I had bought in case Maya's father ever decided to reconcile. the sheets folded neatly into my suitcase, as though each one represented an unspoken hope I no longer needed to entertain. In the living room, I found the Netflix remote and pressed the menu button, navigated to account settings, and chose sign out of all devices. I watched the progress bar fill, swallowing my profile and viewing history, as though erasing the evidence that I had ever been part of their nightly ritual. The ambient glow of the television went dark, and for the first time, I sensed the resonance of the silence, a silence I once feared but now craved. Before leaving, I walked slowly through the apartment a final time. I stood in front of the entryway mirror and examined my reflection. Shoulders squared, eyes clear, the faint lines at the corners of my mouth softened by relief. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the note I'd written to Lisa the night before. "Don't wait up. We'll talk tomorrow," and tucked it into the pocket of my blazer, remembering the first time I had walked through this door as husband and stepfather. I closed the mirror's cabinet and dropped the key into my bag. In the hallway, I stopped and turned back, catching a glimpse of the framed honeymoon photo face down above the microwave. I thought of the promises we made to each other, the dreams of a blended family, and I allowed myself a brief, silent nod of farewell. There was no anger, no bitterness, only the understanding that my presence had become an unpaid service and that to remain would be to consent to my own erasure. I slid the door closed behind me without a click, as though the lock had recognized my departure and decided to remain untouched. Outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and freshly cut grass. I took a deep breath, feeling the rush of oxygen fill the space I had vacated within my chest. I walked toward my car, each step echoing on the pavement like a punctuation mark in the story I had ended. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced one last time at the building where I had poured out so much of myself in hopes of building a life. I started the engine and let the low purr of the motor vibrate through me, grounding me in the present. Then, without looking back, I merged onto the main road, grateful that deactivation had given me more than freedom, it had given me peace. I arrived at the office before the first light of dawn touched the skyline, the hush of the empty parking lot reinforcing the sense that I was carrying out a mission with surgical precision. In my hand was a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, an offering to the day that would chart the course of my life's most decisive pivot. The building stood like a silent sentinel, its glass facade reflecting the dim glow of street lamps and the faint promise of morning. I stepped inside, swiped my card, and ascended to the 14th floor, where my name sat on the door plate beside the title I had earned through years of late nights and unwavering focus. Today, that title felt less like an identity and more like a uniform I was ready to shed. The office was cavernous, designed to impress clients with polished wood floors and leather chairs that bore the soft imprint of negotiators who had danced across these polished surfaces before me. I settled into my own chair, leaned forward, and set my coffee on the desk. It steamed in the low light, its aroma sharp and honest. My phone lay beside it, its screen dark, as though waiting for me to wake it up with the gravity of my intentions. I closed my eyes for a moment, recalling the conversation from the night before. The way Lisa's tone had been so dismissive, the weight of her words drifting between us like smoke. Isn't that the truth? In the half-lit hallway of our bedroom, I had felt something inside me snap, a crystalline shift from hope to resolve. I opened my eyes, tapped the phone's power button, and dialed Jared Sloan. His greeting was as measured as always, professional yet warm enough to cushion the blow I was about to deliver. "Jared," I said, my voice steady, "I need to draw up the papers for a clean break." There was no hesitation on my part, only the calm certainty of a man who knew precisely what he wanted. He asked the usual questions: marital status, assets, whether I anticipated contestation. I answered each with clipped clarity: no alimony, no custody dispute. I want to relinquish everything tied to that household, right down to the subscription services. As he spoke, I felt the weight of every dollar I had spent melt from my shoulders, as though each transaction was a chain being unshackled. When he concluded, he promised to email me the forms by noon and to book us an appointment the following week to sign. I thanked him, hung up, and set the phone aside as though I were placing the last piece of a puzzle into its rightful spot. The next task was logistical, finding a place to stay that bore no resemblance to betrayal, a refuge that would feel neither like a hotel nor an interrogation chamber. I opened my laptop, typed roadside hotel near me, and scanned results until I found one with decent reviews and a cancellation policy that didn't tie me down. I booked a modest room for the next 3 nights, plush enough to reassure me that I wasn't punishing myself, minimal enough to feel temporary. As I confirmed the reservation, the clerk's cheerful confirmation email blinked onto my screen, and I allowed myself the smallest smile, tasting in it the sweetness of autonomy. By mid-morning, the office was waking up around me, phones ringing, colleagues shuffling into their chairs, the distant hum of the coffee machine in the break room. To everyone else, I was the same dependable executive who arrived early and left late, wholly absorbed in deals and quarterly forecasts. But I carried a secret that set my pulse racing. I was dismantling a life that had once defined me, brick by brick, bill by bill, emotion by damp shoulders and stifled words. I felt no guilt, only the steady hum of purpose. At 11 o'clock, I forwarded to myself the PDF of the meeting invitation from Jared, titled Settlement Agreement. I clicked through the clauses: waiver of support, division of shared property, release of liability. Each paragraph read like a dismissal of ghosts, a formal ejector seat for anything that tethered me to a marriage of convenience and convenience alone. I highlighted the sections that required my signature and initial, satisfied by the precision of blue ink in the digital fields. With a final click, I sent it to my own email, marking the act with the solemnity of a vow. When the clock struck midday, I rose from my desk, gathered my jacket, and left the office with the casual confidence of a man who had things to do. The city's energy greeted me, commuters hurrying down sidewalks, cars honking, the scent of lunch specials drifting from food carts. I made my way to my car, each step echoing in my mind like affirmations: this is my life. This is my choice. This is my exit blueprint. I spent the afternoon closing open loops, replying to a few non-urgent emails, asking an assistant to shift my afternoon calls to Tuesday, leaving instructions for coverage in my absence. Each delegation felt like another bolt turned in the lock that would soon spring me free. I paused before a framed family photo on my manager's desk, his wife and children smiling on a beach at sunset, and felt a pang of envy for the simplicity of his joy. But I refused to indulge in self-pity. Instead, I tapped him on the shoulder, explained that I would be out of pocket for a few days, and wished him well with a genuine warmth that surprised him. Back at my desk, I printed boarding passes for my car, for my future, for the final departure from the world I had known. I tucked them into my blazer pocket and stepped outside once more, the late afternoon sun painting the sky in streaks of rose and amber. The cool breeze brushed my face like a promise unspoken but profoundly felt. Soon, I would no longer be the man who paid their bills, but the man who paid attention to his own heart. As I drove out of downtown, the cityscape gave way to highways flanked by oaks and pines, and I felt the tension draining from my knuckles, from the ache in my shoulders, from the tiny tremor in my jaw. I remembered the first night I met Lisa, her smile radiating hope, and wondered whether I had been naive to believe I could rebuild a family without being fully embraced. But that question had lost its power now. I had rewritten the blueprint for my life, and it required no apologies. I checked into the roadside hotel at dusk, the lobby's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The clerk handed me a card key and offered a complimentary bottle of water, small kindnesses that I accepted gratefully. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and previous guests' regrets. I found my room. Simple decor, a queen bed with crisp white linens, a desk by the window overlooking a stretch of highway that led nowhere and everywhere at once. I set my bag on the bed, lowered myself into a chair, and closed my eyes. In the hush, I felt the fullness of relief, the unmistakable thrum of a man reclaiming his own story. No longer knight to a ghost king, no longer banker to unreciprocated love. I was the author of my days, and this blueprint was my declaration of independence. I exhaled, opened the window just enough to let in the night air, and allowed the distant rumble of traffic to lull me into a sense of possibility. Tomorrow, I would sign the papers. Tomorrow, I would return the key. But for tonight, I was simply here, awake and alive, at the starting line of a life redesigned by my own hand. I returned home at dawn, the sky still wearing its soft pre-dawn blush, and found Lisa standing in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her robe and clutching a mug that steamed with morning's first coffee. Her eyes, bloodshot from interrupted sleep, widened when she saw me. I held my duffel bag in one hand, its canvas surface tired and creased from use, the zipper glinting like an unspoken promise of departure. I walked past her without hesitation, each footstep measured, as though I were traversing a hall of memories I had already decided to leave behind. I stepped into the bedroom, where our shared life lay folded and organized, shirts lined in the closet, shoes arrayed by style, neatly pressed slacks draped over the chair I had claimed as my own. I placed the bag on the bed and began to pack with calm precision, folding shirts along their seams, rolling jeans to conserve space, sliding in socks and underwear, as though each article of clothing were a stepping stone toward independence. Lisa's robe fluttered behind her as she followed, her voice tentative. Seriously? You're leaving because of what Maya said? I paused, my back turned, fingertips smoothing the crease out of a crisp white shirt. She's just a kid, she said, drawing the word kid into a heartbreak of condescension. I slid the shirt into my bag and turned, facing her across the bedspread, the morning light tracing the curve of her shoulders. What about what you said? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. The color drained from her face as she opened her mouth to speak, then closed it without producing a word. The silence hung between us heavier than any confrontation. I unzipped a compartment to retrieve my toiletry kit, an unassuming leather pouch that had traveled with me on business trips and weekend getaways. Inside were the essentials, a razor and shaving cream, a toothbrush and paste, deodorant, and a small bottle of cologne I had never worn around her. I packed them methodically, arranging them as though each item represented a fragment of myself I intended to preserve. She watched me with arms crossed, lips pressed into a line that trembled with frustration and, I suspected, a flicker of regret. When I snapped the pouch shut, I placed it atop my folded clothes and zipped the bag closed. I gathered my jacket from the closet and draped it over one arm. I'd been this girl's father longer than her real one ever was, I said, setting the jacket down and meeting Lisa's gaze. I paid for everything, gave everything, and still got treated like an outsider. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed, and I felt a brief stab of compassion for the woman who had once believed in us, who had once smiled at our future with hope. But that hope was gone now, snuffed out by indifference and unspoken contempt. I leaned forward and picked up my bag, the leather strap indenting my palm, and swung it over my shoulder. Without another word, I walked past her and out the door. The hallway smelled faintly of their father's cologne, a lingering ghost of a man whose memory had held more weight in the household than my real presence. I paused on the stoop, hand on the doorknob, and looked back. Lisa stood framed by the morning light, her robe billowing slightly as if caught by a breeze I could not feel. I raised my chin and offered the smallest nod of farewell, a gesture stripped of bitterness yet charged with finality. Then I stepped down, the door clicking softly behind me, sealing the chapter of my life in that house. The drive to my new apartment was quiet, the road slick from overnight showers that left the world shimmering in early sunlight. My bag lay on the passenger seat, heavy with the contents of a life I was choosing to reconstruct. I parked outside a modest brick building, its facade neat but unpretentious, and carried my belongings inside. The doorman greeted me with a nod, unaware of the emotional freight I carried. I rode the elevator to the 5th floor, where the building manager handed me a single silver key. "Welcome home," she said with a practiced smile. I managed a polite "thank you," my voice catching on the unfamiliarity of the word. Home. The apartment was small but suffused with potential. A compact kitchen with white cabinets, a living area that could fit a couch and a bookshelf, a sleeping alcove separated by a sliding door, and a bathroom tiled in cool blue. I set my bag on the floor and unzipped it, revealing the neatly folded contents I had packed. I unpacked slowly, sliding shirts into the closet, placing my jeans in a drawer, lining my shoes on the small footwear rack. Each item found its place without ceremony, as though I were fitting puzzle pieces into a new design. I moved to the kitchen and filled the coffee maker, the familiar ritual calming me. The rich aroma curled around me, and I poured a mug, cradling it in both hands as though it were a fragile treasure. I carried it to the window, which overlooked a courtyard where ivy climbed the walls and a single bench sat empty beneath an oak tree. The sight made me think of Maya in her father's arms, safe and adored, and I felt a pang of sorrow that was tempered by the knowledge that I could not save a relationship that never truly belonged to me. After a long sip of coffee, I placed the mug in the sink and opened my laptop to confirm that Maya's financial plan had been terminated. The college's automated response arrived. Your request has been processed. Effective immediately, no further payments will be accepted on this account. I closed the email and exhaled, feeling the final link of responsibility dissolve. I thought of Lisa's voice when she confronted me at my office, her argument that Maya had been devastated, her plea for empathy, and I realized that empathy must be a two-way street or it is no kindness at all. I set aside the laptop and walked to the couch, sinking into its cushions as though I were sinking into the soft embrace of possibility. I rubbed my temples, feeling the tension of 4 years slowly unwind. For the first time, I was not defined by obligations or resentments. I was defined by the space I had carved out for myself. I closed my eyes and let the quiet sweep over me, a silence I had once feared but now revered. Later that afternoon, I called a friend, Monique, whom I had met months before at a coffee shop. Her laughter had been like sunlight breaking through clouds, and I realized in that moment how much I had missed genuine warmth. "Hey," I said when she answered, my voice lighter than it had been in years. She greeted me with her usual effusive kindness, and I told her I had moved into a new place. She asked for details, and I described the apartment with surprising enthusiasm. She invited herself over to see it, and I agreed without hesitation. As I hung up, I looked around the empty living room, the afternoon light turning the walls golden. The suitcase still lay unpacked in the corner, waiting for its next journey. I imagined myself here months from now, laughter filling the space, art on the walls, an open book on the coffee table. The thought filled me with a warmth I had forgotten existed. That night, I cooked my first meal in the new kitchen, pasta tossed with olive oil, garlic, and a handful of fresh basil. Simple, unpretentious, entirely my own creation. I ate at the kitchen counter, savoring each bite while watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and violet. For the first time, I felt truly present in my own life, free of the burdens that had weighed me down. I realized that liberation does not reside in dramatic gestures or harsh words. It lives in the steady reclaiming of days that once belonged to others. When I washed the dishes and turned off the lights, I paused at the window and looked out at the courtyard bench beneath the oak tree. The world stretched vast and uncharted before me, and I understood that luggage can carry more than clothes. It can carry hopes, memories, lessons learned, and the tools needed to build anew. I stepped away from the window and closed the apartment door behind me, and in that simple act, I felt the finality of departure and the thrill of possibility converge. For the first time since I can remember, I slept without dreams of apology or regret, only with the quiet conviction that, in choosing myself, I had discovered the truest form of love. Moving into my new apartment felt like stepping into a fresh canvas, the walls unmarked by expectations and the air crisp with possibility. I carried the last box of my things inside, books I hadn't reread, a small stereo, a few framed photographs of friends, and set it by the living room window. I paused to consider how many mornings I had woken in a house that never truly belonged to me, and how few I had spent truly at home. I shook off the thought and turned my attention to more immediate matters, official confirmation that Maya's tuition payments had ceased. I opened my laptop at the small desk in the corner, tapped out a quick email to the college's bursar's office, and within moments received their automated reply. Your request to discontinue payments has been processed. Effective immediately, no further payments will be accepted on this account. I closed the message and felt a lightness in my chest, as though the last tether tying me to those 4 years had finally been severed. I resolved to face the inevitable fallout with calm conviction. My phone buzzed before the day was half over, and I saw Lisa's name on the screen. I hesitated only a moment before answering. "You called my office?" she asked, her voice strained. "You didn't think to warn us?" I leaned back in my chair, taking in the sight of the half-unpacked bookshelf and the cheery green plant I'd placed on the windowsill. I sent an email to the college. Their response was immediate, I said. "You had every opportunity to prepare." A pause. Then, "Maya's devastated," she said, softer now, as though the initial anger had melted into something more plaintive. "Her classes are frozen. She's losing scholarships." I let her words hang, and when I spoke again, it was with measured calm. She said she'd never loved me, that her father was better. I responded accordingly. If her father cares so little that he's unaware of her struggles, Perhaps my absence will prompt him to open his eyes. An edge of panic crept into her tone. You can't just drop her like that. She needs you. I smiled at the absurdity of staying to fill a role I no longer valued. I did my part, I replied. Now the rest is up to them. She sighed, and I heard the distant clatter of dishes. She must have taken the call from home. Isn't there something you can do? She pleaded. Some halfway measure? I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. My services are no longer for sale. By late afternoon, I felt the familiar stirrings of resolve strengthen into something akin to relief. I closed my laptop and stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the warm breeze that carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine from a neighbor's garden. Below, I caught sight of a couple walking hand in hand, a simple scene of partnership that once stirred envy but now felt like a promise I might have eventually earned one day. My cell rang again. This time it was Maya's number. I turned away from the railing and answered, steeling myself for recrimination. Are you aware you've ruined my life? She demanded before I could speak. Her jaw sounded tight, her voice brittle. I had scholarships lined up, housing secured, and now it's all gone because you decided to punish me. My heart clenched at the mention of her future, the long nights of study, the tears over lab reports, the proud smile she wore when I told her I believed she could do anything. But I had loved her as best I could, and she had chosen another father's memory over me. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I hoped my actions would remind your father that he has responsibilities beyond nostalgia. If he steps up now, he'll know you need him as much as I once did. A sob broke into her defiance, and for a moment I thought she might break down entirely. She recovered quickly, though, her tone icy once more. Don't play counselor. You don't care. The line went dead before I could respond. I closed my eyes and exhaled, the pulse at my temple throbbing with the weight of words exchanged. That evening, I walked to the corner market, intent on buying groceries to stock my kitchen for the week. I chose vegetables and a cut of meat, pasta and sauce, items that would feed me and remind me how quiet cooking could be an act of self-care rather than an obligation. At the checkout, the clerk asked if I was new in the building. I nodded and smiled, admitting I'd just moved in. She told me the landlord hosted a small welcoming event on Friday and invited all tenants. Encouraged, I thanked her and carried my bag back through the silent hallways to my door. Inside, I unpacked the groceries methodically, placing each item on the stove or in the fridge as though this deliberate care could stitch new memories onto the walls. I boiled water for pasta while sautéing garlic and onions, the aromas weaving into the room like comfort itself. I ate alone at the counter, savoring each bite, noticing how the flavors seemed richer when consumed without the backdrop of disapproval or indifference. After dinner, I washed the dishes and left them to dry on the rack, glancing at my reflection in the window pane. I hardly recognized the man smiling back. Eyes clear, posture relaxed, the tension of 4 years airing out in the folds of his shoulders. I curled up on the couch with a book I'd been meaning to read in a mug of tea, letting the evening quiet cradle me. When my phone buzzed again, I considered ignoring it but saw a new email instead of another call. The subject line read, "Help with enrollment." It was from the assistant at Maya's father's law firm, copying him on the message. "I've arranged a meeting with the bursar's office for Monday morning," she wrote. "Please confirm whether you'll attend." My pulse quickened at the thought of stepping back into the fray. For a moment, I felt the old urge to rush in and take control, to manage the details and rescue her from any fallout. But I resisted. I had played that role long enough. I typed a brief reply. "Thank you. I will not be attending. Any further correspondence should go through Mr. Langford." I hit send and watched the message vanish into the digital ether, a final punctuation. I powered down the laptop and stretched, feeling the hours of tension give way to a lull of satisfaction. I stood by the window one last time, looking out at the cityscape glittering against the night sky, a tapestry of lives unfolding, each window a story of its own. I realized how easy it is to vanish from one story and begin another, carrying only the lessons learned and leaving behind the chapters that no longer serve us. I turned away and walked to my bedroom, slipping under the covers and closing my eyes, the silence of my own choosing a lullaby more soothing than any apology or explanation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, calls, perhaps, or awkward questions from neighbors. But tonight, I slept knowing the money had stopped, and with it, the unfair bond that had once defined me. In its place grew something steadier, a peace born of boundaries honored and self-respect reclaimed. The next morning, sunlight leaked through my blinds as I settled at my desk with a fresh cup of coffee, ready to tackle the day's emails, personal and professional alike. My phone buzzed insistently against the hardwood, and I saw Maya's number lighting up the screen. I braced myself and answered before it could go to voicemail. "You seriously just dropped everything?" she demanded, voice tight as a drawn bowstring. "What about my future?" I folded my hands on the desk and met the wall of her anger head-on. "I paid for your tuition, your phone, your streaming," I said, recalling the stacks of invoices I'd signed off on. "You rejected every effort. I'm acting in kind." Her retort was swift. "My real dad would never do this." I held the silence long enough for the weight of her accusation to hang in the air. "Then call him," I replied, and the line went dead. I stared at the black screen, feeling the familiar ache of disappointment that came whenever I tried to connect with her. It wasn't just about the money. Though ending those payments had been the clearest way to announce my boundaries, it was about the illusion of family we'd both been sold. I leaned back and closed my eyes, recalling nights spent quizzing her on Shakespeare and mornings making pancakes before school. Those memories felt like fragile glass now, beautiful but far too easy to shatter with a careless word. Later that afternoon, I opened my inbox to a new message flagged with urgency. "I'm sorry," the subject read, from Maya's own email address. My heart skipped as I clicked it open, expecting tearful remorse or a desperate plea. Instead, a long wall of text scrolled before my eyes. Half apology, half guilt trip. She wrote of how she'd felt abandoned by her father's death and how I had stepped in, only to vanish when she needed me most. She recounted late nights crying over research papers and how she'd trusted me to be more than a bank account. The words ricocheted between hurt and accusation, each sentence a bid for my forgiveness or at least my attention. I felt the old pull. The urge to type a patient, reasoned response, to walk back through our shared history and pick up the pieces. But I remembered every time I tried to bridge the chasm between us and received only silence or scorn in return. I stared at the blinking cursor, the vast white space of a response waiting for my justification. I thought of the checks I'd written, the rules I'd enforced, the silent dinners where laughter should have ruled. And something in me shifted. Some wounds don't need closure. They need air. I closed the email without replying and watched it vanish into the archive. In that moment, I released the last tendril of hope that Maya might understand my choice. I realized that engaging further would only tether me to a cycle of blame and resentment, an echo chamber of hurt that neither of us could truly repair. The apology in that subject line would remain unopened, as unacted upon as the tuition payments I'd suspended. Afternoon light had softened into early evening by the time Lisa's name flashed on my caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, knowing she would leave a message asking me to reconsider, to find a way to keep Maya on track. But I also knew that if I picked up, I would waver. Instead, I watched the battery percentage drop on my phone, the bar shrinking like the space I was willing to concede. I stood, stretched, and walked to the small balcony overlooking the courtyard, where the oak tree's branches stirred in a gentle breeze. Below, neighbors moved through their lives, an elderly couple tending a rose bush, a dog walker pausing to admire the buds. The scene was ordinary, unremarkable, and exactly what I needed. I closed my eyes and inhaled the damp earth and blooming jasmine, grounding myself in the present rather than the turmoil of family drama. The courtship of self-respect felt subtle but resolute, like dust settling after a storm. That night, I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and poured it into my favorite mug, the one with a chip on the rim I'd picked up at a flea market. I curled into the corner of the couch, the glow from my laptop screen illuminating the empty email window. I opened a blank document instead and began to type a letter, not to Maya or Lisa, but to myself. I wrote of boundaries drawn and bridges burned by necessity, of a heart both heavy with loss and buoyed by newfound clarity. I wrote that love should not demand foreclosure on one's selfhood, and that sometimes, walking away is the kindest form of honesty. When I finally saved and closed the file, the clock read past midnight. Silence wrapped the apartment in a soft cocoon, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Tomorrow, the world might call me unfeeling or selfish, but in that stillness, I understood that some wounds aren't meant to be bandaged by others. They're meant to heal in solitude, leaving behind scars that remind us not of pain, but of our own resilience. Some doors close not with anger, but with the gentle click of self-discovery, and for the first time, I welcomed the quiet beyond. The clock on my kitchen wall read 8. 6:43 p.m. when I heard the knock, a single, deliberate rap that carried the weight of days I had spent rebuilding myself. I paused in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, the aroma of roasted vegetables I had prepared for dinner still rising from the stove, and let the sound linger, my heart tightening with cautious anticipation. It was too late for neighbors, too early for unwanted deliveries. So when I opened the door, I was unsurprised to see Lisa standing there, holding a folded letter in one hand. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt and fear rather than the robe she still wore from home. Her mascara had run, leaving faint smudges beneath her eyes, and she seemed to shrink into herself as though the loss of her fortress had hollowed out her defenses. I took a step back to let her in, though I felt a sharp impulse to shut the door and retreat into solitude. She offered a trembling smile that did not reach her eyes. "I know I don't have the right," she began, her voice cracking under the strain of admission. "But Maya wrote this, and she wanted me to give it to you in person." She extended the letter with hands that shook like leaves in a storm. I hesitated, glancing down at the envelope before meeting her gaze. The handwriting was unmistakable, Maya's spidery script, each loop and line carrying the echoes of her anger and confusion. I reached out and accepted it, tucking it into my jacket pocket with care, as though it were a fragile relic of a past I no longer claimed. Lisa stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click that echoed in the quiet apartment. I watched her remove her robe and drape it over a chair, the domestic ritual a stark reminder of the home I had abandoned. She stood in my kitchen, her apron stained with spaghetti sauce from dinner she had started preparing before realizing I was gone. "She's scared," Lisa said, voice low. "Her classes are frozen. Her scholarship is on hold." She didn't mean what she said. Her eyes brimmed with tears now, and she swallowed hard, as though willing herself not to break. I looked away, my jaw clenched against the urge to lecture her on responsibility and respect. Instead, I focused on the knife block on the counter, the blades gleaming in the soft lamplight, a sharper reminder of how I had severed my own ties without malice, only clarity. I turned back to face her. "I believed in you, Lisa, even when Maya didn't. Even when you stayed silent while she disrespected me." My voice held no accusation, only a weary clarity. I felt at once both sad and resolute, as though I were delivering a verdict I had mourned long before the trial began. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but paused, her hand hovering in the air. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I should have defended you." The words came too late, after I had already drawn the blueprint for my exit. I crossed my arms, steady as a fortress wall, and watched her shrink beneath my gaze. She closed her eyes, as if apologizing to someone invisible. "We need you," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. "Not just for the money, for you." I felt a flicker of compassion for the woman who had once loved me, but the memory of her indifference cut deeper than any blade. I recalled the nights I lay beside her, my back turned in silent protest, the heavy hush pressing against my ribs like a physical thing. "You needed what I provided," I replied quietly, "not who I was." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt the last particle of the man I once was scatter like dust in the wind. Lisa's shoulders sagged, and she looked older than her years, the secrets she had kept etched into her face. She swallowed again, as though struggling to find new words. I did not offer her a chair or a consoling touch. I had learned that mercy without change is merely another form of acceptance. Instead, I walked around the kitchen island and retrieved my jacket from its hook. I slipped it on with deliberate slowness, each movement a punctuation mark signaling the end of something that had never fully begun. She reached for the envelope in my pocket, as if it contained the key to our undoing and our redemption both. I withheld it, the paper pressed against my chest through the fabric of my jacket, a testament to Maya's conflicted heart. "Read it," she urged, voice small. "Maybe it will help you understand." I hesitated only a moment before pulling the letter free. The envelope tore easily, releasing a single sheet of paper. I unfolded it and scanned the first few lines, Maya's voice emerging in steady, remorseful script. "Dear Mark," she had written, "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was angry and scared, and I didn't know how to say what I felt." As I read, a slow ache spread through me, the realization that beneath her anger lay fear, fear of abandonment, fear of change, fear of confronting the man she both needed and resented. Lisa watched me with hope flickering in her eyes, as though the letter might reverse every wrong and bring me back. But I had learned that sometimes a single apology cannot bridge a chasm built over years of silence. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly. "Some things fix themselves," I said, folding my arms against the weight of her gaze. "Some things need time." I met Lisa's eyes, and for a fragile moment, I glimpsed the woman I had married, the partner who had once believed in our future. But belief without action is like a door without hinges. It cannot open. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, letting it sit between us like a fragile peace offering. "I need to keep moving forward," I said. "I can't stay here waiting for someone else's grief to settle." Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I understand," she whispered, her voice resolved yet breaking. I took a final breath, feeling the full measure of loss and liberation entwined in my chest. I stepped back toward the door, hands in my pockets as though cradling both regret and resolve. I reached for the handle and paused, glancing over my shoulder. Lisa stood motionless by the counter, framed by the warm glow of the kitchen light, a silhouette of the life I once inhabited. I offered a small nod, an acknowledgement of shared history and mutual ending, and turned the knob. The door closed behind me softly, the click echoing through the hallway like a punctuation mark. Outside, the night air was cool against my face, a balm for the ache inside. I took a step down the hall and then another, the weight of Lisa's presence fading with each footfall. As the door to apartment 5B slid shut, I felt the last barrier crumble between who I had been and who I was becoming. The clock chimed 8:44 p.m. in the corridor, the minute marking the precise moment I chose freedom over familiarity. And as I walked toward the elevator, I carried with me the quiet certainty that some knocks must go unanswered so that new doors can finally open. I arrived at Jared's office with a calm I scarcely recognized as my own. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the conference table in gold and shadows, as though the room itself acknowledged the gravity of what we were about to finalize. Lisa sat beside me, her expression unreadable, while Jared slid 2 copies of the agreement across the polished surface. The weight of the papers felt real beneath my fingertips. Every clause a deliberate act of separation, every signature line an invitation to step wholly into the next chapter of my life. We traded polite nods as Jared reviewed the final points. No alimony, full waiver of shared property disputes, release of all claims. He spoke in measured tones, ensuring each party understood the implications. I listened, my pulse steady, my mind clear. This wasn't about punishment or spite. It was about respect. For myself, for Lisa, and for Maya's memory of her father. To stay half-present would dishonor every dollar I had spent and every moment I had offered. When Jared paused and looked to me, I lifted my pen and signed my name on the dotted line. The ink settled into the paper with a quiet finality, and I released a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I slid the pen across to Lisa, whose hand trembled as she added her signature. Our eyes met briefly, and in that instant I saw the years of unspoken tensions, hope deferred, loyalty unreturned, love taken for granted, flash between us like a silent film. There was no anger now, only the bittersweet clarity that comes when you honor the truth of a broken bond. Jared gathered the signed documents and placed them into his folder. "Congratulations on your new beginning," he said, closing the leather-bound case with a soft click. His words felt odd. A celebratory note attached to what had been, for so long, a source of pain. But as I stood, I realized he was right. This was my liberation, hard-won and intentional. Outside the office, the city buzzed with rush-hour traffic and hurried footsteps. My jacket hung easily off my shoulders, as though the weight of obligation had lifted from its seams. Lisa lingered at the curb, hesitant. I approached and offered a nod of farewell, the simplest gesture that carried everything I needed to convey. Gratitude for what had been good, acceptance of what had failed, and readiness for what lay ahead. That evening, back in my apartment, I cooked a steak with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. The sizzle in the pan echoed like a victory chant. I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat at the small dining table, each bite rich with flavor and freedom. A Miles Davis record played softly, the notes drifting through the room like a benediction for my renewed self. Friends called, eager to hear my news. I told them simply, "It's over. I'm free." Their voices brimmed with relief and encouragement, and I realized how rarely we allow ourselves to celebrate endings as fiercely as beginnings. That night, I slept soundly, The terms signed in silence, keeping dreams of possibility alive. For the first time, I was both author and protagonist of my story, unbound, respected, and wholly ready to write the chapters yet to come. 3 months have passed since I first turned my back on that house and the roles I once played within it. Tonight, I write this letter not as a plea for understanding from anyone else, but as a testament to the man I have become, a man who learned that giving everything does not obligate others to give anything in return. Mark, you gave everything. You stayed when no one asked, paid when no one thanked you, and loved when you were not loved back. For years you believed presence equaled belonging, and generosity equaled gratitude. You were wrong. Without respect, your sacrifices became invisible. Without loyalty, your devotion felt like a transaction. You deserve more than unreciprocated appreciation. Remember the night you lay beside Lisa, back turned, listening to the soft rise and fall of her breathing rather than the hollow click of her indifference. That silence was not defeat, it was your breaking point. The next morning, you deactivated every service bearing your name. Phone lines, credit cards, tuition payments, streaming passwords. Each canceled account was a nail in the coffin of a life you no longer recognized. You did not lash out or rant. You simply closed the ledger. When you drew up your exit blueprint at Jared's office, requesting no alimony, no dispute, your resolve crystallized. You traded comfort for clarity, substituting the flicker of false hope for the steady flame of self-respect. In a roadside hotel, you felt the first genuine release of breath you had held for years. You unpacked your identity in your new apartment, folding shirts into drawers and sliding shoes onto racks, each action a declaration. Here I start again. The silence of your own choosing became sacred, the background music of your self-discovery. You cooked your own meals, drank coffee on your balcony, and welcomed friends who saw you as more than a bank account. You halted Maya's tuition payments not out of spite, but out of necessity. When she accused you of destroying her future, you reminded her that love without respect is a poor currency. And when her apology email arrived, half guilt, half demand, you left it unopened, refusing to tether yourself to a cycle of blame. You answered Lisa's 8:43 p.m. knock with measured honesty, reading Maya's letter and acknowledging their fear without reopening your own wounds. You signed papers in silence, sat at a dining table with a perfectly seared steak and a glass of wine, and celebrated your freedom instead of mourning a lost family. Now, 3 months on, you date Monique, a woman whose curiosity and kindness are gifts, not obligations. You rest in the quiet that once terrified you. You do not miss the house that never saw you for who you are, nor the ghost of a man you tried to replace. This letter sits alongside Maya's unopened apology, a reminder that some pages are meant to remain blank. Your journey is not defined by their recognition of your worth, but by your unwavering belief in it. You are enough. You will always be enough. Mark.